Hello friends, welcome to UPSC Logics. And Indian Councils Act 1909 was the next act that came after 1892. And as we have seen in the 1892 video, there was some powers given to the legislative councils. The way of election to the legislative councils, the provincial councils was changed to a certain extent, and however elections were not a part of this whole scheme, and therefore the Indian National Congress was highly dissatisfied and felt cheated. So, anyways, then in 1909, the Indian Councils Act came and is also called the Morley-Minto Reforms. So, let us have a look at what this particular act was all about. As mentioned earlier, the Indian Councils Act of 1892, although introduced a limited representation with indirect elections, it failed to placate the Indians who were very much conscious of their rights now, and there was a certain growth in nationalism, and the Congress had divided in the Surat session, and the moderates and extremists had separated. So now the Congress was making more demands, and there was a lot of resentment against Lord Curzon, who had actually partitioned Bengal in 1905. And there was a rise of extremism in the Congress. So the government, on the one hand, wanted to suppress these extremists, on the other hand, wanted to pacify the moderates as well. Gopal Krishna Gokhale went to England and met Mr. Morley, the Secretary of State for India, and the Viceroy, Lord Minto, also emphasized the need for making some reforms. So, these particular Morley-Minto reforms were to pacify the moderates to some extent, and both the Viceroy and the Secretary of State decided to work out a scheme to reform the legislative councils, and this culminated in the Indian Councils Act 1909. So the idea was to give some more power to the locals in matters of legislative affairs, and a provision was made for the expansion of the legislative councils both at the central as well as provincial levels, so through this act. So the features of the 1909 Act were: number one, it introduced separate and discriminatory communal electorates. So this is the beginning of communal electorate in India, and the electorate was decided on the basis of class and communities. So the policy of divide and rule was started from this place. Then number 2 point was the act enlarged the size of legislative councils both at central and provincial levels, and the members of the central legislative councils were increased from 16 to 60. Then point number 3 was the act empowered the members to discuss the budget and move resolutions before it was approved finally. So this was an extension of the 1892 Act, which allowed the members to have a look at the budget but not make any recommendations. And so this particular act actually gave them a bit of more power in the terms that they could actually make resolutions before it was being approved, and they were also given the right to ask supplementary questions and again move resolutions on matters related to local bodies. Number 4 point was that it was a certain curb on the powers of the legislative, and it did not allow any discussions on the subjects which were within the legislative competence of a particular legislature, or any matter that affected the government of India and its dealing with a foreign power or a native state. For example, the question of Burma was raised during the 1892 Act. So this act clearly mentioned that these particular matters which it dealt with other states or foreign powers would not be questioned or discussed in the legislature, and any matter that was under the ruling of the court of law would also not be discussed. Number 5 point was the members were given right to discuss matters of public interest, and however the house was not binding on the government, and the rules were also framed under the act for discussion of matters of general public interest in the legislative councils. So although they were given rights to discuss matters of public interest, but it was not binding on the government, and there were certain rules that were framed by the government on this particular point, whether or how these matters of general public interest could be discussed. Point number 6, it provided for association of Indians with the Executive Council of the Viceroy and the Governor. So Indians were finally associated with the Executive Councils, and Satyendra Prasad Sinha became the first member or the first Indian to join the Viceroy's Executive Council as a law member. So this is an important point. He was the first Indian law member of the Executive Council of the Viceroy, and this was the first time Indians were associated with the Executive Council of the Viceroy. So let us analyze the Parliamentary reforms, and again, like the 1892 Act, it failed to impress the Indians. And what the Indians had demanded was a responsible government in the country, but what they got was benevolent despotism and constitutional autocracy. And although there was a non-official majority given in the provincial councils, it actually resulted into nothing, because this particular non-official majority was nullified by the fact that it included nominated members and there was no real majority of those who represented the people. Let us have a look at a question, and this question might be asked in the mains exam of IES as well as PCS. So, parliamentary reforms have been called a shadow rather than substance. Discuss. The question may be in this form. So, the parliamentary reforms of 1909 gave no real answers to the political problem in India. The political solution for India was in complete self-rule and accountable governance, and in fact the parliamentary reforms were just a face-saving device. The position of the Governor General remained unchanged, his veto power was undiluted, and in fact the act successfully maintained a constitutional autocracy. Moreover, the problems such as narrow franchises, indirect elections, limited powers of the legislative councils ushered in a completely irresponsible government. The Act also added a new problem, which was that of a separate electorate system based on caste and community. And although the parliamentary reforms were introduced, no responsibility was conceded. And moreover, there was no connection of the supposed primary voter and the man who sat and represented him in the legislative council, because all these members were nominated. And in these circumstances, the whole idea of political participation, awareness, and education remained a distant dream. So, in a nutshell, we can call the 1909 Act a shadow rather than substance. So, this is the answer for this particular question. If this question comes for discussion, now there were certain merits also of the parliamentary reforms which cannot be left unseen, and it marked an important stage in the growth of representative institutions. It was one step towards the responsible association of elected Indians with the administration. Furthermore, it gave recognition to the elective principles on the basis of composition of legislative councils for the first time. It was also it also gave Indians a platform to ventilate their grievances. Now they could have actually discuss or make resolutions against the various legislatures before they were passed. And it also gave them an opportunity to criticize the executives, make suggestions, as I said earlier, for better administration. And of course, this also helped Indians to join the Executive Council of the Viceroy. In fact, Satyendra Sinha was the first law member of the Executive Council of the Viceroy. So this particular act actually furthered the demand for complete Indianization of the legislature. So friends, this was a little video about the parliamentary reforms of the 1909 Act. And I hope you have enjoyed this video. If you are watching it for the first time, do like and subscribe to this channel. In case you are a regular subscriber, don't forget to press the bell icon. So thank you so much for watching, and Jai Hind.